to continue our investigation of this new secular trend and warmth in religion and humanism, we have to turn to Italy. Italy will be the place that will take us to the High Renaissance, but let's start with the beginning of the Renaissance. The 13th century traditionally we count as the Gothic period. However, there are voices coming out of the 13th century that do hint at the direction of the Renaissance. And one of those voices is from an artist whose name is Giotto. He is Italian. He does suggest the direction and the growth in Italy of the Renaissance. Consequently, we refer to his style in two separate ways. We can refer to it as Italian Gothic, or we can also refer to it as Proto-Renaissance. You can look at Giotto's dates and see that he actually spans the 13th and the 14th centuries. He also will bring very new ideas into the 14th century, and consequently probably earns the designation of Proto-Renaissance. In the 13th and 14th centuries in Italy, we experience a growth in the city-states. These will flourish and expand, and this should be reminding you of the ancient world of the Greeks and also of the Romans. Each of these city-states is slightly unique and different, and this fosters a kind of growing individuality, and that is totally in line with the reemergence of humanism. In this period in Italy, there will be two sources for art style and for artists to look at and be inspired by. The first of them is going to be Gothic, and that, of course, is a style that was invented by the French. It will take on a national flavor in all of the countries where it goes, including Italy. But okay, number one is Gothic, and number two is influence from the Byzantine Empire, which we all know tends to be kind of formal and remote. Giotto is going to break away from both of these styles and introduce a new naturalism into the works he produces, and I am talking about an incredible leap in terms of naturalism. This is Giotto's Lamentation. That means lamenting or grieving over the body of dead Jesus after he's been taken down from the cross. And we have this as figure 1410 in our textbook. I also have it next to a small example upper right of a slightly earlier and more traditional interpretation of exactly the same subject. That earlier example is more symbolic. We have the visible cross in the background, and it pays much less attention to the natural world. The background actually is gold, so it's a heavenly realm. What Giotto is doing, and you can immediately see this, is turning the stage into a human one. We have a blue sky, we have an outcropping of rock behind the central players. This is brought down into the human realm. The figures now become very solid, very weighty, very monumental. They're incredibly broad forms that Giotto outlines. He gives us also a closed, circular composition. If we want to follow around the figures here, we can do that, and everybody is enclosed in, I'm going to call it an oval. It's probably a better word than a circle. One of the things that Giotto introduces to make his paintings more naturalistic and lifelike is he shows us figures from the rear, from behind. And we're actually looking at two of these figures in the foreground, this guy and this guy located right here. So he's giving us a slice of reality, a little bit, in fact, like photography. In addition, and also like photography, darn it, over here on the edge, if he doesn't cut off figures. So he's really putting this event into the perspective of what we might actually see if we were there. In addition to that, there's really a human emotion that hasn't been portrayed in the Middle Ages before. The focus is placed, and we do run along this diagonal rock, running right down here, bringing our attention to Mary and Jesus. The emotion is on the face of Jesus's mother. Look at the pain, look at the suffering as she leans toward her son in sorrow and grief and almost in disbelief. Then we have the other players, Mary Magdalene down here, who seems in grief to be holding on to Jesus's foot. And this is John, over here, St. John, who's flinging his arms in grief wildly. Perhaps, however, the most amazing part of this religious depiction, and it is religious, but it is depicted now in human terms, is not the earthly crew, but the heavenly one. Look at those angels. Those angels are engaged in a display of human grief, darting about the sky, pulling on their hair, almost pushing the air of the sky in disbelief and pulling their robes up to their faces as they cry, expressing incredible human agony over the death of Jesus. We haven't left everything from the Middle Ages behind. There is still some use of symbols, and in particular, I'd like you to go up here and see the dead tree, which might at first pass as part of the landscape, but it is also a symbol. It refers to death, which Jesus will overcome through his resurrection. It also could indeed reference the cross, which was the vehicle for Jesus's death as well. But instead of actually giving us, as we have right here, a cross that is visible and symbolic in a rather traditional way, Giotto is now moving over to something from the natural world. And that is one of the contributions that Giotto is going to make for the future. Giotto represents a growth in humanism which is becoming a strong trend that will lead directly to the Renaissance itself and ultimately to the High Renaissance with the superstars like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. This is Giotto's Kiss of Judas. It comes from the same fresco cycle as the Lamentation scene. Both of those were painted inside the Arena Chapel. It was a chapel that was built on the site of an ancient Roman arena in the early 14th century. The depiction here is really the taking of Jesus by the soldiers. There is an angry mob, a crowd coming towards Jesus. Giotto has used a night scene for this so that it highlights the torches. We've got some here, and the clubs that are being carried in the air. There is a crowd over on our right back here, and these represent the Jews who have turned against Jesus and want to turn him into the authorities and want him identified so that he can be taken away. We do get a real sense of the violence of the crowd. Maybe the word mob is better here. Even the noises that are being made. One individual is blowing a horn right here, but you can also imagine the kind of clanking of metal and clubs against each other in the air, so that this truly becomes a chaotic image. There is one quiet spot, and it is the very center, located right here. This is the spot where the figure of Judas embraces Jesus and is about to kiss him. It is a sample of good versus evil. It also shows Jesus very calm and controlled, willing to accept his destiny. If you look at the face of Judas, you might begin to suggest that there is some trouble that he's feeling, maybe a little regret at his choice that he's making. The image of Jesus is also relatively ideal. The image of Judas tends to show him as a kind of distorted and ugly image. That comes out of the Middle Ages, where our physical appearance reflects our spiritual state. Judas wraps a yellow cloak around Jesus as if to engulf him in it. And in this period, yellow was associated with deception and deceit. It was particularly associated with non-believers, and this will be the source, for instance, later on in World War II, when the Nazis will force Jews to identify themselves with stars, but those stars will be yellow. There are other details in here that are drawn from the story that are treated in a very, very naturalistic way. If we go over here, we're going to see this figure. This is Peter. And what Peter is doing is lunging forward to cut off the ear of one of the individuals going after Jesus. This is a reflection of the, I'm going to say by legend, the nature and personality of Peter, who tended to be feisty and very quick to anger. There's another disciple. You can see a total of 3 halos, well, almost 3. Jesus has one, Peter has one. One is cut off here. This disciple has become frightened, and so what he's doing is running away. This is his cloak, and this is a guard that is grabbing onto that cloak to try and keep the person from leaving. You can also, I think, read some of the emotions, almost hateful, particularly on the face over here of the crowd that is coming to support the idea of the arrest of Jesus. This again is set in the natural world, and it is pretty amazing in that it is a night scene to highlight the torches. It is really a religious story brought down to our world, but told in human emotions, ranging from the calm acceptance of Jesus to the hatred of the crowd coming to arrest him, and the anger of Peter and the fear of the disciple who runs away. Giotto is really taking us to the verge of the Renaissance. This will be a strong return to humanism, which is the foundation of the Renaissance, both in the North and in the South.